Welcome to the ultimate true crime ranking.
11 real-life serial killers ranked by their chances of surviving an encounter with Dexter Morgan.
The fictional Bay Harbor butcher who hunts murderers. What you are about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about criminal profiling, intelligence, evasion, and the cat-and-mouse games between predators. Dexter Morgan represents the perfect hunter. A forensic blood spatter analyst by day and a serial killer by night, he combines formal education in forensic science with an intelligence quotient that placed him at the top of his medical school class. His methodology is flawless: extensive surveillance, identity theft mastery, and a ritual that involves strapping victims to tables with plastic wrap before delivering a fatal stab wound to the heart. Over his career, Dexter directly killed 156 people, each one meticulously planned and executed according to Harry's code, the moral framework created by his adoptive father, Harry Morgan, that dictates he only kill murderers who have escaped justice. But Dexter is not hunting fictional characters. He is hunting real people who have already proven they can evade the most sophisticated law enforcement agencies in the world, some for decades. Let's start with the killers who would likely defeat Dexter entirely.
Tier 1 maximum survival probability.
Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, sits at the top of our survival rankings, and for good reason. This man terrorized California for over 4 decades while hiding in plain sight as a police officer. DeAngelo served with both the Exeter Police Department and the Auburn Police Department during his peak killing years, giving him intimate knowledge of investigative techniques, evidence collection, and most crucially, law enforcement limitations. Investigator Paul Holes, who spent years hunting the Golden State Killer, concluded he was dealing with a sophisticated and intelligent offender. He said the offender turned out to be a former cop who understood law enforcement tactics. He had been trained as an investigator for burglaries, and he had skill sets beyond the average person. DeAngelo committed 13 known murders, over 50 rapes, and 120 burglaries across 11 different counties. He taunted police, saying he had his next victim already stalked and they could not catch him. It took genetic genealogy, a technology that did not exist during his active years, to finally identify him in 2018. True crime author Michelle McNamara, who coined the name Golden State Killer in her posthumous book I'll Be Gone in the Dark, recognized his methodical modus operandi years before his capture. Against Dexter, DeAngelo would leverage his police training to anticipate surveillance techniques, his geographical knowledge to avoid capture zones, and his decades of experience evading detection to simply disappear when needed. Next comes Israel Keyes, perhaps the most terrifying name on this list. Called the most meticulous serial killer by the FBI, Keyes represents everything Dexter thinks he is, but taken to an even more systematic extreme. Unlike most serial killers, Keyes had no victim profile. He chose targets completely randomly, making his modus operandi nearly impossible to predict or track.
Keyes buried murder kits across the country containing weapons, duct tape, shovels, guns, rope, and body disposal materials.
He would travel with no discernible pattern, buy one-way plane tickets to major hubs, rent cars, and drive hundreds of miles to retrieve these kits before hunting. This cash system meant he never had to risk carrying weapons on planes or using traceable credit cards near crime scenes. But what makes Keyes truly dangerous against Dexter is that he studied other serial killers obsessively. He read the book Mindhunter by FBI profiler John Douglas, and he claimed to know every serial killer ever written about. He called Dennis Rader a wimp for showing remorse, and he expressed admiration for killers who have not been caught. Keyes would recognize Dexter's patterns because he had studied them among other hunters. His army training provided weapons expertise, and his 11-year killing spree proved his patience and discipline. When asked why he killed, Keyes simply replied, "Why not?" This is not someone Dexter could manipulate or predict. This is someone who would study Dexter right back. Ted Bundy rounds out our top tier, and his inclusion might surprise you given his eventual capture. Bundy had an IQ of 136, and his escape artistry creates a unique threat profile. Bundy did not just evade capture, he actively fought back against the system trying to contain him. In 1977, Bundy engineered 2 separate escapes from Colorado custody. The second escape has become legendary. Bundy intentionally lost 30 pounds over several weeks, allowing him to squeeze through a small hole in his jail cell ceiling. He crawled through the building's infrastructure and simply walked out. This level of long-term planning, physical dedication, and spatial intelligence suggests someone who would not just hide from Dexter, he would turn the hunt around. Bundy's mobility across state lines exploited jurisdictional weaknesses that do not exist in fiction, but that plague real investigations. Against Dexter, Bundy would likely use his criminal psychology knowledge to manipulate the situation, his charm to gather intelligence, and his escape expertise to disappear when cornered. Tier 2, high survival probability. Moving into our second tier, we find killers with moderate to high survival chances. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, evaded capture for over 30 years through a combination of Air Force training, community integration, and sheer patience.
With an estimated IQ of 118, Rader served as a church leader, Boy Scout troop leader, husband, and father, while simultaneously binding, torturing, and killing victims.
His ability to compartmentalize was absolute. Rader's downfall came from his own ego. He asked police if a floppy disk could be traced, believing their assurance it could not. The metadata led directly to his church computer and his user profile. But against Dexter, Rader would not need to communicate. He would simply watch, learn, and wait. His 3-decade gap between his last murder and capture proves he could go dormant indefinitely. Edmund Kemper presents a different kind of threat entirely. At 6 feet 9 inches and over 300 pounds with an IQ of 145, Kemper represents raw physical dominance combined with psychological sophistication. Kemper studied forensic psychology, understood criminal profiling, and ultimately turned himself in, suggesting someone who maintained control even over his own capture. In a physical confrontation, few people could match Kemper's size and strength. But more importantly, his intelligence and psychological training mean he would understand Dexter's motivations and potentially manipulate them. FBI profiler Robert Ressler, co-author of Mindhunter, conducted extensive interviews with Kemper and noted his exceptional ability to analyze other killers' behavior patterns. Kemper chose when to stop killing and chose when to surrender. That level of self-control suggests someone who could choose when to engage Dexter and when to simply disappear. Rodney Alcala, the dating game serial killer, possessed an estimated IQ of 170, higher than Einstein or Stephen Hawking. Alcala appeared on national television while actively killing, demonstrating a level of psychological compartmentalization that borders on the supernatural. Police found over 1,000 photos of potential victims, suggesting a scope of operation that dwarfed most serial killers. Alcala's intelligence would allow him to analyze Dexter's patterns, predict his movements, and potentially turn the psychological warfare back on the hunter. Anyone who could appear on television while wanted by police can manipulate a predictable vigilante.
Tier 3, moderate survival probability.
In our moderate survival tier, we find killers whose specific skills might give them temporary advantages. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, murdered 71 confirmed victims over nearly 2 decades. His Navy combat experience in Vietnam provided weapons training and psychological conditioning for violence. But more importantly, Ridgway understood victim selection in ways that frustrated investigators for decades. By targeting sex workers and runaways, Ridgway chose victims whose disappearances would not immediately trigger investigations. This strategic thinking suggests someone who would recognize Dexter's victim profile and potentially use it against him. If Ridgway could convince Dexter he was innocent while simultaneously gathering intelligence, he might create opportunities for a counterattack. John Wayne. Gacy killed 33 people while maintaining a public persona as a beloved community member. Gacy understood human psychology well enough to gain his victims' trust, often posing as a police officer or using his clown persona to disarm suspicion. His ability to maintain dual identities for years suggests someone who could potentially fool even Dexter's investigation. Gacy's weakness lies in his psychological need for control and his eventual sloppiness. Burying bodies on his own property showed poor long-term planning, but his manipulation skills and community standing could provide temporary protection against Dexter's initial investigation. Eileen Wuornos represents a unique case study as the most notorious female serial killer in American history. Wuornos killed 7 men between 1989 and 1990, claiming self-defense against sexual assault. Her survival skills, honed by years of prostitution and homelessness, gave her street-level tactical awareness that most killers lack. Against Dexter, Warnos would benefit from being an unexpected demographic, because Dexter's experience hunting primarily male killers might create blind spots in his criminal profiling approach. Tier 4, Low Survival Probability. Jeffrey Dahmer represents our moderate low survival category. His medical training provided anatomical knowledge that rivaled Dexter's own education, and his army service as a combat medic added practical experience with death and dismemberment. Dahmer's ability to maintain his killing routine for over a decade while holding employment suggests adequate operational security. However, Dahmer's alcoholism created a critical vulnerability. His drinking problem led to his military discharge and eventual job loss, indicating someone whose impulses would ultimately override his planning abilities. Against Dexter's methodical approach, Dahmer's personal demons would likely prove fatal. At the bottom of our survival rankings sits David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. Despite his army training, Berkowitz represents everything Dexter would easily defeat. Berkowitz claimed to hear voices commanding his kills, used the same weapon repeatedly, and actively taunted police with letters. His disorganized approach and psychological instability would make him an easy target for Dexter's systematic hunting methods. Analysis: the military and intelligence connection. But here's where our analysis becomes truly interesting: the military connection. An overwhelming number of these killers, DeAngelo, Keyes, Rader, Ridgway, Dahmer, and Berkowitz, received formal military training. According to former military psychologist David Grossman, combat training breaks down the natural human aversion to killing through psychological conditioning. Once removed, this aversion never returns. This military background provides these killers with weapons expertise, tactical thinking, and psychological conditioning that civilian killers lack. Against Dexter, who learned his skills from Harry Morgan rather than formal training, this represents a significant advantage. The intelligence factor adds another layer of complexity. Despite popular media portrayals, the average serial killer IQ is actually 94.5, below normal. What they possess instead is what expert Peter Vronsky calls animal cunning, predatory instincts for manipulation and weakness detection that we mistake for intelligence. But our top-tier killers genuinely possessed superior intelligence. Alcala had an IQ of 170, Kemper 145, Bundy 136, and Rader 118. Combined with their predatory instincts, this creates adversaries who could potentially outthink Dexter's systematic approach. The evasion periods tell their own story. DeAngelo had an evasion period of over 40 years, Rader 30 years, and Keyes 11 years. These were not lucky escapes, they were sustained campaigns of deception against increasingly sophisticated law enforcement. Each developed their own version of Dexter's methodical approach, but refined it through real-world testing against actual investigators. Perhaps most chillingly, several of these killers studied other serial killers as extensively as Dexter studied his targets. Keyes claimed to know every documented serial killer. Bundy studied criminal psychology academically. DeAngelo learned investigative techniques professionally. They would recognize Dexter's type because they had seen it before. The geographic factor cannot be ignored either. Bundy, DeAngelo, and Keyes all operated across multiple jurisdictions, exploiting communication gaps between agencies. Dexter's Miami-based operation, while thorough, represents a geographically limited hunting ground. Against killers accustomed to national-scale operations, Dexter's local expertise becomes less relevant. What emerges from this criminal profiling analysis is a hierarchy based not just on intelligence or kill count, but on adaptability, patience, and systematic thinking. The killers most likely to survive Dexter are those who share his methodical approach but possess additional advantages: police training, military experience, superior intelligence, or operational scope. DeAngelo's police background gives him insider knowledge of investigative techniques. Keyes' cache system provides operational flexibility Dexter lacks. Bundy's escape artistry offers options when confrontation becomes unavoidable. Each represents a different path to survival against a systematic predator. The killers in our lower tiers, Berkowitz, Dahmer, and others, fall victim to the same flaws that eventually led to their real-world capture: impulsiveness, addiction, psychological instability, or simple carelessness. Against Dexter's patience and planning, these weaknesses become fatal. But our top-tier killers possess something Dexter rarely encounters: genuine peer-level opposition. These are not just murderers who escaped justice, they are apex predators who refined their hunting techniques across decades of real-world application. In the end, what this true crime ranking reveals is not just who might survive Dexter, but what separates the most dangerous killers from the merely deadly ones. Intelligence matters, but adaptability matters more. Training helps, but patience proves crucial. And ultimately, the killers most likely to defeat Dexter are those who share his greatest strength: the ability to think like both predator and prey simultaneously. The question is not whether these killers are worse than Dexter. The question is whether they are better at the same game. For our top tier, the evidence suggests they just might be. But not every killer is born a monster. Some are shaped by tragedy. In the next video, we look at a boy who drowned, was neglected, and returned as one of horror's most brutal icons, Jason Voorhees.